All right, let me start again. First and foremost, I just want to thank my colleague, Dr. Mark Souther, for giving you, in my opinion, a very good overview, very comprehensive overview of the beginning and the development of this project. So what I'm going to do is really not to repeat or reiterate most of the things he has said, but to give a kind of a macro level view of my involvement in this project so that you can perhaps be able to see and appreciate the inner details of this project, particularly what I myself was doing, how I started participating in this project. I was actually invited by Dr. Mark Souther and the previous director of the Center for Public History and Digital Humanities in the Department of History, Dr. Mark Tebo. They invited me and asked me about the possibility of developing humanities content, how to perhaps look for research, collect content for this particular app, that mobile app that they were thinking of developing. So they explained their intention, they explained their objectives, and I immediately realized that there was something here, and that this was something that was going to be very, very interesting and very, very productive for scholarship, for students, for the study of African history at large. So let me mention a few issues that immediately struck me as important in this project. I come from a country, Kenya, which has a lot of very interesting historical sites, heritage sites. Sites are very important for historians and even for communities. But the issue of preserving these sites has always been a big challenge. Many of these sites are actually not being preserved, they are not being maintained, and where they are maintained, they are not being maintained properly. A lot of them are actually falling apart for various reasons, including financial reasons. But given what the Center for Digital Humanities in Cleveland had done with the Cleveland historical sites, I realized that perhaps this was an opportunity to help in preserving, in conserving, and in protecting important sites, historical, archaeological, significant sites that would be very important. And perhaps if you may have been paying attention to news on Kisumu, I have heard that there is an intention to rebuild Kisumu so that the city kind of faces the lake. That means that there are a number of buildings that are going to be demolished, a number of buildings that are going to be destroyed. And with that, the history of those places are also going to disappear. So I realized that this kind of project was perhaps going to be helpful and useful in protecting such kinds of sites, perhaps, if not digitally, but perhaps, maybe, possibly convincing county officials that some of those sites, even as they are rebuilding the city, perhaps some of those sites could be preserved and maintained for future generations to look at, visit, and appreciate. I also realized that this project was going to be important in helping to collect primary data, accessing data. It is easy, if you are here in Cleveland, to have access to journals and to have access to books, secondary materials. But what about primary materials? It's very difficult. But this kind of project had the possibility of collecting primary data and making them accessible to our students as well as to scholars. So that when you are working on a place like Kenya or any part of the African continent, or even the third world, you do not just have to rely on secondary materials, but also on primary materials that are collected in those kinds of places. Another important thing that I realized about this project was the involvement of the community in telling its story. Quite often scholars, I don't know whether it is, I suspect it not necessarily deliberate, but sometimes we might think that we want to tell the story for people. Here was a project that was intending to give people the opportunity to tell their story, to talk about their experiences, and I felt that that was also very important. Another important objective that I noticed was very clear and very interesting was the fact that a project like this one would lead to universities not being ivory tower places where scholars speak amongst themselves, but also speak with members of the community. Another important objective which interested me in this project was the fact that it could involve students in actively learning actively, engaged learning, actively doing research, collecting materials, while at the same time not just working with fellow students within the classroom, but also working with students from other parts of the world, other cultures, and learning about those students as well as learning about their history. I also realized that this kind of project was really a cost-effective way of accessing primary material. Imagine you want to do research on Kisumu, or you want to do research on Kenya, or on Uganda, or Nigeria. You will either have to rely on secondary materials which are accessible, or you will have to travel. And traveling, visiting those particular places involves a lot of finances. In terms of flights, for example, in terms of accommodation, there are so many things that you have to pay for in order to be able to do research. This kind of project had the possibility of making these kinds of materials accessible in a cost-effective way, so that you can be able to do your research perhaps at your desk, in your office. And if you have to travel, you have to travel basically to collect something that you could not otherwise collect through the alternative way we are proposing here. Another important objective or issue that interested me in this project when Dr. Mark Souther talked to me about it, Dr. Mark Souther and Dr. Mark Tabo talked to me about it, was the issue or the idea of giving back to the community. Now, this is a very special issue. When you come from a place like Kenya, or you come from Uganda, or you come from Senegal, perhaps educated with resources from the local community, there's always the question of giving back to your community. How do you give back to your community? What are you doing in the United States? Yes, you are in the United States trying to teach, trying to raise awareness about your country. That is one way of giving back to your community. It is about trying to produce people who should be aware about the place of the US policies, people who informed citizens. So working with students here is one way of giving back to the community. But there's also another way of giving back to the community. For example, now that we are working with students at Maseno, we are almost directly giving back to the community, because you are working with people who come from those particular places. So you are not just giving back to the community by helping to produce awareness in the US where you work, but you are also directly working with students in the countries where you come from. So giving back to the community was also another reason why I felt that a project like this one was interesting and had the potential to do much more beyond what we were intending to do with Maseno. Another important Another important point that I would like to mention, quite often when we do research or we engage with other parts of the world, there's often not deliberate, but there's sometimes a situation where we tend to develop ideas based on the assumption that we know what ought to be going on in those places. These are the things we need for you to do to build your communities. This is what we need for you to build your economies. This is what we need for you to do to have a stable country. Sometimes people do that, not with bad intention, but in the process of making such kind of assumptions, you might actually produce something that is not very relevant to the people you want to engage with, although your intentions are good. So I felt that a project like this one, involving Maseno right from inception, I would like to emphasize that this project did not just begin with us sitting and talking among ourselves. We actually involved our Maseno University colleagues right from the inception of the project. When it came to developing classes, for example, courses, topics, we involved them right from the beginning. And so we tried to engage with them as our colleagues, as equals, where we exchange ideas, we learn from them, they learn from us, our students learn from their students learn from us. So it is showed me that it was possible to deal with our colleagues, students, as equals, as opposed to simply identifying ideas and trying to tell people that this is, because it actually amounts to imposing ideas which may not necessarily be the best way to work with people. Finally, I felt that this kind of project would be important in trying to get around, coming from different political experiences, sometimes we have cases where political leaders tend to control the flow of media. I don't want to politicize all this, but I just want to mention that a project like this one can help people or provide people with alternative access to knowledge that is not necessarily mediated or controlled by other people. So I've talked about my interests at a professional level, but I would also like to say that I was also interested in this project. I was also interested in this project at the pedagogical level. I felt that a project like this one, beside my interest as a scholar, was going to be very important for students. I've already mentioned that it would involve students to actively participate in learning. But equally important is the whole idea of fieldwork, the whole idea of students gaining experience, collecting data. Quite often students do fieldwork at the graduate level. Most of the students we are working with and that we have been working with are undergraduate students. And many of these students have gained experience doing research, and they are getting experience that they would otherwise not gain until they are at the graduate level. Another important point to mention is that the students, especially now that we have finished the spring course, and these students have now had their work published on the Makleki website. So they are able to see, they are able to achieve something that for most of us, we were not able to achieve until graduate level. And that is, I think, very important. Equally important is the fact that the students are developing friendship. They are gaining friends. In fact, I met one student just a few days ago on the corridors when I was going to class, telling me that she is communicating with her friends that she has acquired, that she has developed friendship with from the course we did in spring semester. So that's something that is very, expanding the mental and friendship horizon of our students. It also empowered, I felt that it was going to empower our students, given the fact that they are going to produce works that will have impact, not just for now, but also for later on, impact on fellow students as well as members of the community that they are dealing with. I would like to mention something that I have been thinking about. I don't want to call myself a military historian, but I try to work on military history. And a project like this one, I'm now seeing has many possibilities. We have a number of Africans here in Cleveland, as well as in Ohio. Some of these students, some of these Africans are actually, perhaps I don't want to use the word, but refugees from military conflicts, from civil wars, from Somalia, for example. It is possible that a project like this one can now enable these refugees to tell their stories, to talk about how they happen to have been caught in a situation where they had to leave, where their stories could have disappeared, where their stories could have not been recorded. It is possible, if this kind of project is managed in an effective way, for people like those ones to have the opportunity to talk about their story, to preserve their story for posterity. Now, I want to take about 5 minutes. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the project, because I would like to leave more time for us to engage in a discussion. But how did we try to create content for this website? So I would like to So I would like to talk about how we started creating content for this. Now that I'd talked to my colleagues, my actual engagement in this project began with the creation of a course in spring 2015. And there were a number of challenges that we encountered. Part of the problem was the fact that many of the courses our students take are preset. They are set on the course catalogs, university catalogs, maybe like 1 year before students actually begin classes. And so this project was beginning in the middle of a catalog which had already been set. And so we had to think about how to tune or reorient the courses we already had to the project. In other words, teaching the courses as they were set, while at the same time trying to get our students to work on the sites in this project. And so that was something that we worked on. It was very difficult, but we worked on it. We also realized that we needed to have a small number of students, at least at the beginning. This was just at the beginning of the course. So I ended up with 11 students, while Maseno University had 13 students. Other issues that we dealt with included the semester system here is not the same as the semester system in Maseno. We had to think about how to coordinate our activities. For example, I think when we began our semester here, the Maseno University students were yet to begin their classes. So you have to figure out how to, when are you going to begin the course, and so on and so forth. Identifying research topics, we had to coordinate with our Maseno University colleagues. Developing a joint syllabus. So all these things are things we tried to do in order to make this course work. Explaining the project to skeptical students. Most of the students had signed up for South African history course in my case. So now we are going to do Kenya. How do you explain that to them? I mean, I registered for South Africa and you want me to do a course on Kisumu. So it was very challenging trying to explain to them, but I'm happy to report that our students were very, very understanding. They knew exactly what was going on. From initial skepticism, many of them went on to become very enthusiastic participants in the project. Equally important, my colleague Mark talked about things like time difference between Maseno and Cleveland. Many of our students do not realize that there's a big time difference. Sometimes you are very anxious about your work and you want to call somebody or you want to text somebody and you are and you do it, but then why is that person not responding? It turns out that maybe that person is asleep back in Kenya. So, and they would come and complain and I would try to get in touch with those students. So time difference, things like those ones, communication breakdown, technological problems. So there were all those kinds of things that we had to work with. Our colleagues at Maseno will talk about their workload. There were all those kinds of issues, sometimes traveling to different campuses, make it difficult for us to get in touch with them. Creating a website. And actually doing things that are as simple as just an acronym, like Makleki is the name of the website. It was very hard to actually develop a name for that. We played around with all sorts of acronyms, including, I think, Michael or something like that. But eventually, we ended up with Makleki. We didn't like it. And then somebody told us, you know, all these names you see, sometimes they begin like that, people don't like them, but then later on they get used to it. So it turns out that we are now beginning to get used to the acronym Makleki, which stands for Maseno, Cleveland, and Kisumu. Finally, I would like to talk about problems like how do you get a student who is not directly under you to work? How do you get them to do a deadline? I mean, how do you get them to submit a research? They know you are not going to give them a grade, so you can as well just be whistling in the wind. So those kind of problems. How do you make sure you have leverage on a student who is at Maseno and you are over here? So those kind of things. Or how does my colleague in Maseno make sure that a student here does what he requires the student to do? There were also other problems, technological problems, lack of cameras, and basically shepherding students through the course. I'm happy to report that as a result of those experiences, today we have a course which is much more well-tuned to the project, as well as, of course, for students' interest. We have taken into account all the experiences we had during the first semester with this project, and we, I believe, have developed a much more robust course. We are much more experienced. When I started this project, I didn't have a lot of experience. But right now, I'm using, and my colleagues here will also confess the same, using the same experience to develop the course we are now directly working on Kenya. And we have already identified the topics, and those topics, by the way, I would like to mention, we develop them jointly. As I mentioned earlier, we are not there to say this is what we'd like you to do, but rather it's an equal partnership where we interact, we engage, we ask each, and not just scholars, but also we try to get civic leaders also to try to tell us what kind of stories would they like us to tell. In other words, involving the community in learning. I just want now to finish. I don't want to spend more than 2 minutes, but what my colleague Mark has already talked about, the, looking into the future. What are the possibilities of, what's the future of this project? In terms of the future of this project, I think that Dr. Mark Souther talked about most of these issues, and I just want to emphasize on one of these issues, because he has already mentioned many of these issues. I think the biggest challenge I see is sustainability. And by sustainability, I mean funding. How possible is it for our colleagues or any other university that might want to participate in a project like this one to provide or to find funding and to maintain this project going into the future? That, amongst other challenges, looks to me like perhaps the biggest challenge, sustainability, particularly looking for funding. And then finally, the final point among all these issues is dealing with political challenges. What happens if you write a story, a student writes a story that somebody somewhere does not like? Here in the US, it is easy to get away with this kind of issues. They are, but sometimes we talk about countries where this kind of issues can be a life and death issue. A politician may not like the story you wrote about him, or a politician might not like a story you have written about his rival. Perhaps you gave a good story about his rival, and so why did you do that? So those kind of challenges, how do we deal with those kind of issues, particularly in countries where we may not necessarily have robust human rights protection and freedom for expression, for people to express themselves without fear from leaders in those kinds of countries. So in a nutshell, I started participating in this project through the invitation of my colleagues here. I immediately realized that this project had a lot of potential. I have participated almost at every stage of this project. We've gone to project directors meeting in Washington, D.C. We have made 2 trips to Maseno. We have already taught a course, and we are now in the process of teaching another course. And we've been communicating with our colleagues by text, by calling, and by other means. So I see the future of this project as very bright, very robust, although there are those challenges. But I think that all said and done, I think that this is a good project which has a lot of potential. Thank you.